This lesson is on painting your very first still life and watercolor. Classical Art Education Center is a Blue Ridge Academy's approved vendor. Although this is a lesson on painting your very first still life and watercolor, the previous lessons prepare you for this one so you don't struggle so much. From painting simple fruit to a glass object to a metal object to a lesson on understanding illumination or different types of light and how it affects color and values, and practicing those by painting the same blue drapery onto two different lights, all that is necessary so in this lesson you struggle a lot less and actually move on to understanding the next concepts. If you haven't reviewed those lessons, I strongly suggest you do so you don't struggle in this one. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. In this lesson, I am not going into the explanations on construction of the objects or the composition of the still life. All of that is covered in our drawing lessons. By this time in the curriculum, student should be able to draw each object convincingly enough and focus on the main goal of this lesson, which is the color-value relationships of multiple objects and those colorful reflections. The most interesting part is discovering how various objects of various values and colors affect each other and affect the colors within those shadows. Please note that what you see on the screen is not very accurate when it comes to color-value relationships. It's close enough, but in reality, it's much better. And this is the beauty of the Russian academic art method. You're learning to draw and paint from life, never ever needing to depend on any cameras, photoshops, or alterations such as that. And now let's start painting this first still life. The point of this exercise, I am giving you a white object, this vase, and all the others have color, right? So the point of this exercise is to capture those reflections. Even if you didn't draw everything precisely correctly, this is not about drawing, this is about capturing all the reflections, proper color-value relationships. The white object is easy to see all the different colors reflections in, right? The pink, light very pink cloth and the purpley kind of blue cloth, they actually, if you look at them side by side, they seem to be related. It's like the same pink, only added a little bit more blue and it darker value. If you look at the color in the light on the purple cloth, it seems to be picking up that pinkish in the light, right? It only looks darker purpley in the shadows. It doesn't seem to be so purpley in the light. So the strong light kind of washes out that color a bit, right? Which is what we studied in the previous lessons with the drapery. Now, the three reflections in the vase, and especially from your angles of observation, you will see that all three show up in the vase. The pink from the cloth, the purple from the dark cloth, and the yellow from the pear, right? And they're showing up in the shadow parts. The shadow part from the purpley cloth shows up in the white vase, especially on this side, a lot, right? That shadow is partly so dark because there is all that dark purple cloth there. So less light is reflecting off of darker cloth. The pear itself, being kind of yellowish greenish, reflects in the vase right here as well as a little bit of the pinkiness on this side. So because this vase is turning this way toward us, every time it's turning and facing slightly more downward, whatever is down there starts reflecting, it picks up its light, right? This is turning downward, it picks up all those reflections. This is turning right toward the pear. Pear is close, reflects that yellowishness. This is partly yellowish, partly pink, and all of this here is getting affected by the purpliness. So, for example, these are very light here, right? Light pink, yellowish from the pear, very light value reflection. But the purple cloth, it reflects, but it also affects the value by making it darker. Mm-hmm. So when something is reflecting, it is not necessarily making your shadow value lighter. Yeah. It can make it darker. And the dark cloth will make the value of its reflections, such as right behind the pear there, and such as on the side over here, it makes it even darker. Mm-hmm. So where we learned the relationship between light and shadow intensifies on the edges, right, where there is more contrast, and the shadow becomes a little darker and the light becomes stronger and lighter, that is still working, but this color, for example, here of the shadow will be more of a independent color of that vase and how it looks in the shadow, right? In this case, white, kind of grayish, bluish. But the moment this purple cloth starts affecting it, it starts turning dark purpley. See? Here, obviously, the shadow becomes more pink, and here it becomes more yellow. Here it becomes darker and purpley. So the only place where we actually see true, and it's not really the right word to use, but true enough for this context of the color of the shadow is right here, basically, where it's least affected by close-up objects. Here, it's more like what white looks like if we removed all of those and we just left the white vase with white background. The shadow would look something of the same color, maybe slightly lighter value, because if we have more lighter objects, it will be less dark, right? But the color-wise, that's what I'm talking about. Right here also, and inside there. Inside there, inside the vase, it's the least affected by all other objects, right? All right, so in that context, what we need to do is, first step, is to quickly stake out our colors. And those colors on the cloth are so strong and so colorful because the main vase is just plain white, and it takes up like the majority of the composition, the majority of that attention. So the best thing would be to first do all the background and the pear, and then choose all the colors for the vase, for the light and for the shadows. So just so you don't overdo it, don't do it too dark if you start with it, since it's the lightest. So I am choosing my rose with a little bit of blue, because that pink cloth is leaning toward purple, right? So I'm gonna do a very mild wash first, basically for everywhere. This is in the light, so I'll keep it lighter. And I'll just thicken my pigment a bit for the background, for where it's going up vertically. And that is strictly so we have a bit stronger value. Carefully around the white of the vase. Looking rather purpley, right? Yeah. That's where it disappears behind there. Folding. And how we're gonna make it look not quite so purpley and cool, but by adding a bit of a rosier value over here. So now the color value is separating from what I gave to the foreground. However, right here, I don't want it to look too similar because it's folding and it's actually becoming quite a bit darker. All right. And of course, you remember how it's going to dry up and look a lot lighter. Right here, it's intensifying, becoming very bright. So since everything wants to drip in here and fill in this particular low spot in the paint, I'm just picking this up and adding a little rosiness as well. Okay. So this is a good first pass. So now let's work on getting that purple close to the color value we want, right? So we don't want it to be too light. And we'll probably have to go over several times. Let's see, how's that? Okay, so this is like in the right range. And in the light, it's also not quite so colorful, so this is good. I'm trying to still see where my shadows are. And it looks like it will be fine. So I will be able to see my shadows, the sketch I made, without losing that. Okay, so here's our light value. And why waste time and paint? I'm going to go ahead and make a stronger color because stronger, darker value, and go ahead already fill this in here. And already indicate that edge. That edge is forming. I don't want to yet mess with the shadows under the pear and under the vase. I want it to soak in a bit. Okay, let's see how this one is. Okay, that seems to be okay, not too spreading. And this one, yeah, that's two. It's working. All right, I can leave it like that. So the first indication. Now we need to figure out what kind of color would be good for the pear. Pear in the light and pear in the shadow. What do you see as the difference?
The light looks more yellow.
Mm-hmm.
The darker looks more like a green.
Green until it starts reflecting the purple, right?
Yeah.
All right. And what kind of yellow is it? Warmer, cooler?
Wait, I forgot how it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is called?
Cadmium
This
or
one.
Indian?
Oh, cadmium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely not need to start with the cadmium, and I'm adding a little bit of Windsor blue to it. Because even though I see that it is yellower than its own shadow, it's definitely greener. When I compare this yellow to the pinks and the purples, it doesn't look all that sunshine yellow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm adding a little coolness to it. And also I'm seeing that the light is pretty strong and it's washing out our colors of the pear in certain places. So I'm going to also leave a few highlights. Where do I see? I see a highlight kind of forming like this here. And I see another highlight forming here. And right here it's pretty strong as well. So I'll do this. So what happens when you fill in your main color like this in the light and in the shadows, when you start working over the shadows, that color still somewhat comes through and it has that unifying effect. If you paint your shadows too separately, too differently from the colors you choose here, it may not feel like it's connected, like it's part of one object. All right, that's pretty strong color. And why not choose the shadow right now? Why not go for that? But for the shadow, I will add a little Indian yellow to it. So Windsor and Indian. Well, Indian usually gives us a little more delicate green, so it's not so obvious and not so jarring. Fill in my main parts of the shadow. See how I didn't fill it right here? Mm-hmm. I'm letting the paint blend because it's still kind of wet. I'm letting a little bit of that yellow come through, and that yellow is going to help me unify and echo this, only be a little bit darker before I go really dark on the purple cloth reflecting in here, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just very lightly soften up these edges. Again, we're going to go over it again with other values. I just don't want a super sharp line. Just no sharp lines, that's all. All right, so another pass on the purple cloth would be good to make it plain darker, just to do the value, just to start building up that value. Even in the light, everywhere, we need to make sure that our value of the purple cloth is definitely darker than the pinky one. And now that I gave it another darker pass, you can see how this is starting to look a little too pale, right? What else can we compare this value but to the pure white and to the white within the pear? So we're still keeping an eye on that. It will still be coming, the final fine-tuning. What I'm going to do over here is fill it with the generic, sort of in the distance, nothing special kind of color. I'll go by what I see, like that wall. I will ignore the brown of the wood. I don't want this to be taking up any attention whatsoever. Getting rid of the white. All right, now the white vase is starting to stand out more. And when we look overall at the still life, we're seeing that this light on the white is very, very strong. Mm-hmm. The next strongest is the highlights, strong reflections in the pear. And after that, only then comes in the lighter pink, right? So that's what I'm already keeping an eye on. So now let's do the shadows on the vase. to keep it separate from this purpley blue, bluish purple. We need to be careful with the color value we choose for the vase. As of now, how does it look to you? How would you describe that color? Compared to, let's say, the purple cloth, how would you describe that?
To purple? It looks a little warmer. To purple.
This?
Yeah.
Well, let's say if we ignore the reflections and just look at this one, what kind of color would you say that is?
Well, on the top, on here, it changes from at least. On the top, it's yellow, then it goes into a green, dark green, and then on the very edge, it looks more purple.
So here it definitely looks a little on the greenish blue.
Yeah.
Then it's kind of like touch and go between more purpley and grayish bluish. Pear affects it, makes it almost like greenish and yellow. Here it's again some kind of gray. Here it's more purpley, here it's pink again. So, and right here, it's probably the darkest right here, right? And it's also kind of like dark, almost as purple. And here it's again, it's a little more greenish blue. But that is only comparing to the others. So because of that, I am mixing my gray with Indian yellow. Indian yellow very little bit, Indian red, and blue. See how it's coming out? So let me test it just right here. How is that color? Let's say if I made it a little lighter. How is that?
Yeah.
Do you think it will work? As a
maybe a little greener,
starting point?
Yeah.
Okay, a little, let's add a little bit more Windsor to it. Because Windsor by itself can turn green pretty easy. How's that? If it was light.
That's not bad.
Maybe a good start?
Yeah.
Imagine how the other colors would be infused into it, the pink, the yellow, the purple, right? So compared to here, this and this, it looks greener. Blue or greener. Let's go with that. Let's fill in carefully right here, our first pass for the shadow within. That kind of stops right there. Our halfway between light and shadow is kind of like here. I will carefully fill this in. This one's going to be very dark, so fill it in. This one goes under. I'm going to leave a little space here so they don't bleed, and I will utilize that to make it my reflection very soon here. So remember, values, right? We first focus on achieving the right value. We then focus on adjusting the color. Cast shadow over here. And now, before this dries up too much, I'm going to go ahead and add my pink reflection and let the colors blend together. So my pink will become darker, but it will already be there. And then I'll pick up a little bit of my yellow and I will add it right here. and rather strongly. So for example, I'm looking at that pink and I don't see enough of it, so I'll add more. Like that. And where I was saying I was going to add more yellow, right here, right? Even though it's already kind of dry here, I will still work on that. Because the value is still pretty light, so it's adjusting. And then I'll add a little bit more pink right in here. And then I'll go ahead and add my darker value again here. Darker value. And now I'll pick up some of my purple and I'll already introduce it in here. Why not? Start pushing that value more toward the dark and the purple. Okay, I don't want to mess up this nice reflection here, so I'll stop. Let this dry. Right? The first initial block in is just fine. I like how it's going. While it's drying, let's give another pass to the purple cloth. Let's make sure that it's getting darker value. Also, so far I've been taking just Windsor blue and rose. And it's been coming out kind of baby purple. Right? Almost Barney the dinosaur, but not quite. So we don't keep it so simplistic. I'm going to introduce a little bit of my Indian red into it. And I'm going to give that little layer of complexity to the color. So it's not going to be quite as strong as before, as strongly purple. So for example, let's go over here. That's better. It's not so simplistic. And it's getting that nice, rich, dark color. Of course, it will get lighter as it dries, but so far so good, I think. All right. So just so we are not quite filling the light portion with color, right? What I'll do is with a damp brush, I will pick up a little bit here. And I'll pick up a little bit here. So it's starting to lose color in the light. And it's getting that stronger contrast. So the trick here is to try and see how the value in the light looks like when you are comparing it to everything else, to all the other values and colors. Okay, what is this little drip? Get rid of it. And as the table is turning gently, I can even add more value here, now that it accepts it. Soaked in a bit, that's good. All right. So where else can I pick up a little bit of that value, but not as strongly, which is why I'm leaving it till the end, when it soaks in a bit more, is over here. Why do I not want to pick up too much and too strongly here?
It might compete with the other ones.
It's in the back?
Yeah.
And this is in the front. So what wins?
The front.
The front should be more contrasting, right? That's why there you're just a little suggestion and you're good. This is also pretty dark, even though it's getting kind of like direct light, but at a stronger angle, but I'm leaving it the way it is because once I darken these shadows and once I darken this shadow, it's going to look even lighter than it is now, right? Okay, so let's adjust the color value on the light pink, add that shadow here, and see how this will then look. Maybe push it back a bit more. Where do you see it more strongly pink? In the light on the table or the light part in the back?
More pink?
More pink. Like strongly pink.
Oh, well, in the back, I see it more strongly.
Right, like right here it feels the most strongly pink. Yeah. Here it's starting to be washed out. Mm-hmm. But ours, compared to everything else, is way too washed out. Mm-hmm. And so that means we are adjusting that. So another mild wash. Keeping in mind that because it's in the direct light, the strongest, we need to keep it more pinky and not so purpley. Okay, not like purpley like that. So here I've added. It now starts to compete. I'm washing off my brush, spreading it, letting it drip. And now that I'm coming here to make that corner, I'm going to add darker value. Darker pink, darker, slightly more purpley. And actually it looks almost like bluish purple in the shadow, right? So there we go, I'll even throw that in. All right, and so then for the background, adjust that once more. I will start with just my rose right here to give it that stronger feeling value. And then I'll start pushing it a bit more toward the purpley again, like I did everywhere else on this background. If you are playing with color on these big sections like this, it's good. I strongly suggest to not be intimidated with playing with color. If you see it a little bit bluer, add a good amount of blue. If you see it a little bit greener, add a good amount of green. If it doesn't work out, you can lift it up with a brush, redo it, make it more mild. But many times it will actually look very good and painterly and interesting. And you would want that to look interesting. All right, so here, to emphasize that strong light, I'm going to just leave the value that was there before and soften up this contrast. Okay, so now look how the shadow on the pear doesn't look so dark anymore. First it seemed like, oh wow, it's so dark. But now it's kind of blending too much and looking too similar with the light. So I'm going to go over it once more and make sure that I at least hit it close to the value. Now I want to emphasize that reflection. And now I'm going to pick up some of my actual purple. Actual purple that I used on this cloth. And right here. All right, so remember what we learned in Introduction to Values, where we started with black paper and worked toward light and lighter values, right? The emphasis between light and shadow. When you have an object with a darker shadow here, the background usually intensifies in lightness right on the border, right? And There's the strong light shining on it, but what makes it even more intense is the fact that the pear gets that very dark shadow and dark purple reflection. That's what makes this look more intense. All right, so right now, I will go ahead and keep it intense. Later, I'll have to decide and make final decision. Do I want it to stay intense, or do I want to soften it and push it a little further into the depth? Do I want the strong light come out from here, or do I only want it from here and the reflections? See? All right, so now we can add a little bit of color to the white. The white's not pure white, and it has a certain color of its own. How do you see it in this context? What kind of color is it, do you think?
A little swarm, like a really light yellow or orange-ish. Well, at least on where it curves. Like right here the most.
Right, it starts to get a little like orangier and beige almost. Yeah. So the easiest thing is to first give it a bit warmth, and I'll use my cadmium yellow here. A bit warmer color as just cadmium by itself. Just to give it warmer hue and see how that looks compared to everything else, right? So, doesn't look too bad. It looks like a warm sunshine, but now we can start adjusting it. So if I grab a little bit of my rose and Indian red, that will give it a bit more of the beige type of look, but a very mild wash. It will still soften it up, right? I will leave it the brightest here for that more intense change between light and cast shadow. I can get a little bit in here and a little bit in here. All right. I'm purely just bringing this color over the others, not because of any special reason, but because it wants to drip there, and I don't want any hard ridges between the watercolor layers. Okay? It's not gonna, this much of a value is not gonna affect this much. All right, so done that. And now let's give it a bit more kind of like an orangey look in certain places, like you said, like for example right here. Maybe that's too strong. Soften it up. A bit more orangey looking. Coming down here as well. Right here. And maybe a little bit over here, but also here it's kind of starting to be also a bit already grayish and cool. So for now I will let this be like this and soften it up. Keeping that this part is getting stronger light, but also keeping in mind the fact that a little bit of my other values can already be introduced. And so what is the goal? But to make it look nice around and turning. And now that I'm adding those darker values, I can soften this transition a bit as well. As I proceed to darken the shadows, this won't look so strong anymore. And that's why I'm not particularly worried about how it's looking right now. So let's go ahead and add a little bit more of the stronger value. Where is it intensifying? But right here. It's becoming darker, and it disappears behind the pear. But let's add a little bit of a more purpley hue to it, because likely it's that cloth, that purple cloth. Now I would want to soften up this edge and this edge here. Okay, now where I can darken it right here, right on the edge, more like. Here it starts as a cast shadow, so the edge of the shadow could be a bit sharper. Here it's starting to kind of be the curvature of the vase itself plus the cast shadow. So this is where it starts to become not so sharp, the shadow itself, right? So this is kind of like our transitional space. The shadow is not very sharp. It's becoming darker. It is somewhat blending with our yellow from the pear. So it's becoming kind of greener. Then toward this end, it's becoming a bit lighter and then becomes very dark on the edge. So let's go ahead and give it a more dark edge first. And then we'll decide what kind of reflection hue would be more appropriate in there. Because right now it just looks lighter than the other, that's all. But lighter than this shadow, that's not a good enough identifier. What would be a good enough identifier if we looked at it and saw some kind of color change. So as I'm softening up this edge, that intense purple color disappears, almost. And now let's decide. This will stay more yellow, more yellow but darker. But right here, it's becoming, it's almost like bluer. Let's keep it lighter and bluer. There, I just threw in some straight Windsor. And then it's becoming rather warmer in here, right? So I'm going to grab something warmer. And what I have is Indian yellow and Indian red together. And that makes a kind of warmer color that I already know will work well with all of this. And right in here, it starts to lighten up. Still staying darker, but lightening up. And then it meets that reflection. And then on the edge here, it's very softly darkening. And then it's blending with all of this. There we go. The only thing I don't like is how angular this is. I want it more soft. All right. So I will come in here now, and while it's still wet, give it just a little more definition, so it definitely looks defined, not wishy-washy, no rough edges. And right here, give it a bit more value. And right underneath, I want to make sure that this reflection here continues and has that warmer look. Even though it's getting darker, it still is a lot warmer than the rest. combine this one. And this is where it's starting to get lighter. So I'm just using a basically clean brush and restore the definition right here. It's pretty dark here. The darkness continues along the edge, and as this starts getting darker, this starts getting lighter underneath. So this is the darkest portion here, and everything else is lightening up. Okay. So while I'm in the neighborhood, might as well add darker value right here. Same color as our base color for the shadow of this vase. But the same idea that it's getting lighter toward this end and lighter towards this. Okay? Now, oh, I noticed I dragged some paint over here. Clean up, clean up. All right, now that the vase is becoming so defined, we need to bring into fine-tuning everything else, right? So this, we already knew was quite a bit darker, but now we can compare this value to what's going on in the cloth that's causing that darkness, right? So let's compare. So for example, in the light, it's definitely lighter than this value, right? But where there are shadows forming, such as a little bit over here, another fold, the cast shadows here, and this one, they're starting to be very comparable. So let's just work on darkening those values then. And now I am using more of my Indian red, only a little bit of rose, because I don't want my shadow to look too richly purple. So I will go ahead and add a little bit of the shadow here. And soften up the transition. And I will add a little bit of that darkening here. And I'll soften up these transitions. I am going to darken this shadow here, especially right under the pear. See how intensely dark it is there? Mm-hmm. But as it goes away from the pear, it starts to be less dark. And a strange rosiness shows up within it. So I will add the rosiness. And so my rosiness is not too naively rosy. I am going to add the Indian red. Because in this context, the Indian red looks almost like a strong red. All right. Looks like right here I can make it even darker, so I can add another pass. And I can add a little bit more of it here. And the rest, Indian red. And then it strangely is getting a bit darker again. So I'm grabbing more of my darker shadow. But what is happening there is the edges are very soft. So I will soften them up. Just run your clear brush along the edges and just plain soften them up so they don't look sharp. Here it needs to look sharp, very close to the object that's casting that shadow. That's justified. See how it's already left a little bit darker? That's good, it's working for me, that's what I see there. So now I'm going to add stronger shadows right here. Because of how this fabric is, I guess it's not exactly very smooth, but it has this kind of strange little edgy folds. So I'm going to go ahead and try and imitate those as well. And here it's becoming more straight, so I'll leave it straight. Just play with something that's going on here, but not exactly 100% sure. And frankly, this is not exactly the point of our exercise today, so this will work. Just a little suggestion of something else going on in there. So I see that the back of that shadow is once again becoming a bit darker, but right through the middle, right here, it's becoming lighter, and it's like rosiness, reddishness, but also it's the yellowishness from the apple. And I'm grabbing it, like, and dumping it really strongly in here because I need to overcome how dark the layers of paint are already here. All right. Okay, let this go for a little bit, let it dry. So now we're going back into bringing everything tuned together. So since we have this dark, very dark defined shadow on the white vase, we can define the pear a bit more. The darker shadow reflection within the shadow right here, that is very purpley, needs to be put in. And remember again, so what we learned is that because this is so much darker and this is intensifies, it has to look very stark, strong. But right here we enter in the territory of where there's a lot of darker cloth, right? The darker background. That means, so now we're going to define this reflection as slightly lighter. See? Mm-hmm. So we already have a lot of darker layers, and now all I had to do is grab a little bit of Indian yellow and just rub it in and add it to my already dark reflections. Here, I don't see much change in color, so I will just add this darker, my darker purple reflecting. The light on the cloth right underneath really pops up when we darken that reflection. But as we enter right here, do you see the definition between the pear and the cloth, the touchdown area? Do you see it?
I honestly don't.
Right.
It's blended.
Exactly. So we want to keep it this way. That's the effect that we want to achieve. We want to have that realism. We want to have that magic touch. So see how in this area the pear becomes kind of warmer. So this is my Indian yellow and Indian red added, and while my purpley reflection was still wet and dark, I'm blending them nicely and softly. Right here also, it's popping up on the edge here. That's just the nature of the pear, that it looks a little bit more orangey. Just a teeny bit more yellowish orangey next to the purpley. That's also your opposite on the color wheel colors, right? But as it goes away from that purpley, it starts to become greener. And that's what we're gonna continue with. We're gonna start darkening it toward our shadow. Our shadow seems to be intensifying over here, but not too solid. That's why I'm just dabbing all of this here. And the rest I'm going to blend, because I don't want it to look too solidly one color. For example, right here, it's greenish, lighter. Here, it's orangish. Right here, it's a bit greenish that is lighter. And then it's becoming greenish that is darker. And now I can start softening up my transition between very light and shadow. I see that it's not totally bright right here. It's kind of a transitional color. It's a bit sharper here, but here it's more transitional. It's more transitional color here, and then it becomes darker shadow right here. Again, here it's partly transitional, and then it becomes bright, just the kind of bumpiness of the pear. Here my value is, again, in the middle, between it gets very, very bright, and all of this is now not so bright. It's all turning away from light. Nice and roundish kind of shape in here. And this here is more like, again, some kind of more like a bumpy area, little bumps. But not so sharp, because even though it's bumps, they're still turning. So soften up. Where else do I see slight value change? But right here. I see that the edge of the pear is nice and sharp and bright, but it is not as bright as the highlights. And between this highlight and this highlight, there's a bit of a darkening. Why is it darkening here? Why would it do that? Do you know?
Because of the bump, maybe?
It's changing the direction at which it faces light. The highlights means it's facing light the most at that angle, like closest to 90 degrees. And this, as it's sloping this way, it's changing how it reflects light. And where the highlights are means it's the most toward the light. Okay, so yeah, we can further change this to a mid-tone value. Leave it a little bit brighter, but soften up this edge. I'll keep this simple, even though I see there's a little bit of another bump, but I'll just simplify it. You don't have to do everything in this exercise. So now I'm coming here and cleaning up the edge here. So my pear is round. The edge is not too distorted, but it also removes that line where the watercolor paint dried up and formed the line. And when it forms a line, it creates that very sharp edge. And then it's less painterly and more linear drawing-like, and we don't want that. But also softening up that line gives us the appearance that pear edge turning away from us, and thus it's further away. It's turning away and it's becoming further away. That softens up that line and connection. So you see how I'm softening up and the value is darkening a bit. I'm going to darken it just a bit more. Still with my Indian yellow, but darkening it. Because when I'm looking at the darkness and comparing it to the light, it's one thing, we see the strong contrast. But when I'm comparing the lightness of the yellow reflection and comparing it to the actual light in the pear, then I see that there is a difference, right? The reflection looks lighter than the surrounding colors and values, but it's considerably darker than the light in the pear. And we want to make sure we don't lose that. We have to maintain that. All right, so now this edge is more softened up. This here is more bright. This here is turning away from light. While it's looking strong, I will give it just a little more value because it's now going downward more. And now I'm going to get rid of my pure white on the highlights of the pear. I'm going to give them a very, very mild yellow. Very mild cadmium yellow. And soften up the edges. And I'm not softening them up super. I am only softening them up a bit because those reflections are kind of sharp. They're not too mild. But because of everything else that I've done all around, they are standing out still. They still don't look like they're mild. Okay, so what else can we do? Pear values are pretty strong. The changes between light and shadow is pretty strong. It's starting to look good next to this darkness. We can add a bit more darkness for some of it. So let's not go there anymore. Let's keep it more simple. We can add extra sharpness here under the pear, the cast shadow. I'm adding it more like in the front. I'm softening up toward the back and softening it up toward where the pear is receiving a lot of that darkness, because that transition here is nearly invisible. It's there, we know it's there, but it is so affected by all the reflections of the dark purple cloth that it is wiser to keep it much more subtle. Let the viewer's eyes fill in the rest, and they will do that. You didn't over-explain, and they had something to do when they were looking at your painting. A little bit more definition here. What can we do now to improve it? Can you suggest something?
I can't. Laura can. I just noticed that it's not important, but the thing is missing on the pear.
The stem?
The stem.
Yeah.
Say that too.
That's for the last,
yeah, that's
last thing. Yeah.
I think the reflections on the pear still need to be softened a whole lot.
Which ones? The highlights or?
Or sorry, the highlights.
Highlights. You mean blended more?
Yeah.
Still too jarring. Okay. I want to emphasize this reflection here. I agree the highlights have to be softened. I would like to emphasize this reflecting here. First, I'm going to add a little bit more pink here on the edge, and I would like to straighten out this edge as well. So here we need to decide how this edge is going to work, because we have that light to dark, right? If something, can I borrow one of those flat paint brushes?
Yeah.
Laura, can you hand that one? Big flat one. Yeah. Because my paint here went a little too far. And I would like to bring that lighter value. And have the lighter value against the edge more here, against the edge of the curvature of this vase. All right, so now that I've cleaned it up, now I can work more on that edge. And that edge it's darker, but it is not gray. It looks very like darker, brownish rosy. You see that? So I will give it brownish, rosier, darker edge. And only as it starts to come down here do I see it becoming more of our shadow color. And again, it's more intense here because it's a cast shadow caused by this edge. But then as it goes away, it becomes lighter and not quite so dark. But compared to the pear, compared to the edge of the pear, it is quite a bit dark. So I'll do that. There is more rosiness reflecting on that part of the vase here. And then right here, it stays nice and bright. And almost like there is a bit of yellow in there, right here. You see that?
Yeah.
So I'll throw in a little bit of my cadmium and combine it with this rosiness. Okay, now this edge of the pear is more defined as well. That's all working out so far. I will add a little bit of a occlusion shadow. Occlusion shadow right here where the fabric under the vase gets darker. This will emphasize that edge a little bit more. I see that right here. My darker purple fabric is becoming darker, so I'll restore that darkness there. That also helps to make that pear stand out more. That's getting the light. I will add a bit more of the curvature right here. I still don't feel like it's totally curving well. I want it to be more curvy, more body. Bulky. I think it looks a little bulkier. I think this is all a little too much the same. I will do a nice little wet and wet pass. Little warmer value because it's still in the light, and then a little teeny bit of my cooler value added. All right, so again, I'll borrow you. It's just because it's harder, this one, it has that hard edge. It's better for blending. Okay, and while it's still wet, I will add another nice strong yellow, slightly on the greener value to it. Okay, that might be too much pigment. Okay, now it's still kind of shiny, but not so strong, right? Let's make sure that this is also curving. Since this is the brightest, this is becoming just a little bit darker as it's curving away. This is also here, is not as bright as the rest. This is already nice, good transition. And this here could be just a tad darker. So you see again, so what is happening here being darker, lighter. This is becoming slightly lighter, and this is slightly darker. Even though it's very subtle, it's still working. Here it's where it's so dark, it nearly blends, and we're allowing it to blend. Here again, it's the darkest, then it becomes very bright, then it's becoming darker again because it's a darker reflection. Then there is a slightly lighter greener reflection, becoming darker shadow, becoming midtones, becoming lightest, curves away. I will add another little curving away here. I already sort of have it here, but I'll emphasize it a bit more. Just push it a little over toward that edge. All right, so the last thing I will work on a little bit, just to fix that a bit, is this here, where the this area is going behind the table. And if it's going behind the table, I want it to look definitely darker. Emphasize this edge of the vase, which is very bright against the background. Again, against the vase here, it's becoming darker. And I'll even add a little cooler hue here. How's it looking against here? It looks pretty cool, like almost bluish against this edge. And the rest is like pretty peachy, but I don't want it to be too peachy, so I'll use my Indian red. If it's too pinky, it will compete with the foreground. I will give a slight cooler pass over here. Basically, I'm just grabbing my blue and I'm going along this edge. That brings the vase edge more toward us. And I could do a little cleanup there at the end, but basically this is all being blended, disappearing. And right here, I'm keeping it nice and bright because I need that contrast again. And I will do one more improvement, and that is I'm going to give a slightly warmer pass with my Indian yellow. And I'll bring the sunshine right in here. This will make it still be rosy, but more like it's in the light. like it's in the stronger light. Very mildly. And very mildly, I'll do the same thing right here. It will emphasize the light, the warmth of the light. But everything else, I'll keep the other hues. See how I further separated the warmer from cooler, right? So now it's looking a lot cooler. This is warmer. That means it's going further back. And this is all just benign, so I'm gonna give it just another pass so it's not so light. Just plain keep it from being too light and too much attention. This is just, we'll call it the empty space, the void. Okay, my brush is not big enough. And so it doesn't look too cut out, I'm going to also run my brush here and soften up this transition. Some of this color will come over here, some of it will blend with that, and that gets to go further back once again. Now let's add that stem. Right? How can we go without the stem? That's the last funnest part. I'm getting a lot of my Windsor blue and Indian red. And I'm forming this kind of brown that is not too strongly brown. I'm going to put it, I know it's like right on the edge here, kind of partly blocking that shadow. I'm going to make it first very dark. And when it dries up a little bit, I will come there with your flat brush and I'll pick up a little highlight very thinly in between so it shines. All right. While this is drying, you want to suggest anything, feedback, questions, anything?
I just wanted to see it from your hand.
Yeah, and from the distance. So as I just stepped back, for example, I see that I can further...
I see
yeah.
that right here, it's more warmer. It's a little bit more orangier.
Okay.
Well, this one, I mean, this one is good, but I feel like this should be a little, maybe here.
Orangey, warmer. Good, good, good. Yeah, I agree. This could be just a little darker here because it's your mid-tone. And it should be more like this values here. That one a bit more orangey, so grabbing a little bit of my rose and a little bit of my Indian yellow and adding that orangey hue. How's that? Keeping that a little more yellow to echo the pear better. And I guess one last thing, it's minor, but just make this a bit deeper, darker, right in here. And then clean up this edge here where the paint intruded into the vase.
Maybe on the bottom of the pear, especially where it curves, it might actually need to be a little bit darker.
Right here?
No, right here. Yeah, right
there. Yeah, you're right. This kind of dried up lighter. So we're darkening that. Let's hope that doesn't dry up too light. I will separate this part, because it's vertical, with the very rim that receives more light, right? And I'm grabbing just my very mild, sort of in between my bluish gray and warm light. Like this. See that? Mm-hmm. Separating them. So the rim looks the whitest. This brightest area here looks the whitest. This, I was hoping it would look the whitest, but some other paints intruded, but it's almost there. I do have a little bright white spot in here, which is good. Doesn't have to be super perfect, but you just need to show me that you understood how to do all the different color reflections in here. Some artistic messiness is allowed. Okay. It dried up darker. Is that dark enough? All right. So you can finagle with this more. And I would love to finagle with it until it looks perfect. But you guys need to start painting. So basically, you understood step by step how to be bold with color reflections, right? Mm-hmm. And how to emphasize that transition. If there is something dark, behind it has to be something bright, mm-hmm. lighter. But to which degree that's what you're learning how to judge. To which degree you're going to push it toward the brighter, lighter, darker, and so on. Okay? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The only thing I can think of is along the bottom of the pear, like where it touches the table. Same with the vase, there needs to be like a little sliver of darkness.
We already contemplated on that and decided to let the viewer fill that in. Because it is pretty dark and it's starting to be hard to tell. You're right, but we decided to let it blend.